Good morning all, and thank you for joining us for the webinar on Reinventing HR to Develop Leaders in partnership with Wilson Learning. I'm Neha from People Matters, and before telling you about today's agenda for the webinar, let me give you a brief about today's topic. Across organizations, newer avenues are opening up for HR and L&D. Leaders from HR and L&D need to devise strategies to capitalize on the new opportunities. L&D leaders are aligning the function with the business needs and delivering real value. Their new role is to advise and develop leaders who are their internal customers. They are striving to create a strong and trusting relationship with the internal customers. This also enables the business leaders to buy in the advisory process offered by L&D leaders. Relying on the advice, the business leaders can also boost the solution for their problem and identify value attached to it. The key points which we will cover in this webinar session are: how do learning leaders creating trust in internal customers of the organization? How can the process of buying learning be facilitated in business leaders? How do L&D leaders declutter complexity for developing leaders? We have the privilege of having with us David Yesford, Senior Vice President, Wilson Learning Worldwide, and Vivek Chandramohan, Managing Director, Wilson Learning India. David Yesford brings valuable experience, strategic direction, and global perspective to his work with clients. David is an active member of Wilson Learning Global Executive Board with current responsibilities at global level. Over the years, David has held strategic roles in Wilson Learning Worldwide core content areas of sales and leadership, as well as e-learning and strategic consulting. Prior to his current role, he held managing director positions for Wilson Learning Worldwide in both China and India. David has more than 28 years of experience developing and implementing human performance improvement solutions around the world. Vivek Chandramohan is responsible for overall strategy and operations across India. In this role, he regularly meets with business leaders to provide sales, consulting, and leader development guidance. Vivek has been an integral part of Wilson Learning for nearly 6 years, having served as Wilson Learning India's sales manager and a program facilitator and consultant. Vivek has more than 15 years of experience in the field of information technology-enabled services, sales and sales management, including tenure at IBM India, eServe International, Dell International, and HCL Technologies. Our partner for today's webinar for helping us make this program possible is Wilson Learning. For 50 years, Wilson Learning has partnered with organizations around the world to consult, access, design, develop, deliver, reinforce, and sustain learning solutions fueled by passion and vision for helping people and organizations achieve performance with fulfillment. Their broad-reaching capabilities include providing learning services that help address human performance needs, including performance consulting, instructional design, customization, and flexible delivery of learning solutions using every available modality. Employing global presence to meet needs for consistent learning solutions around the world, ensuring local and cultural adaptation while working in over 50 countries and 30 languages. We have saved time for you to ask your question at the end of the webinar. For those watching the live webinar, you can submit questions at any time during the presentation through Q&A section. We will try to respond to as many questions as time allows. We have a full exciting agenda for the webinar today. So without any further delay, I'm going to hand over the webinar microphone to David and Vivek. Over to you both.
Thank you, Neha. Good morning, everyone. My name is Vivek Chandramohan, and I work with Wilson Learning in India. We also have David Yesford from Wilson Learning Worldwide with us, and I'll introduce him in a short while from now. And I wanted to thank you all for being a part of the webinar today and taking the time out. And I'd also like to thank People Matters for helping us host this webinar. As we were preparing for this webinar, we thought you might have some questions, and what I thought I could do was to start by answering some of these questions before we moved forward. The first question we thought you might have was, why this topic? And really, the purpose of this is for HR and L&D's ability to add value to their organizations, and this one has been discussed quite a bit of late, and even People Matters are doing quite a bit of activity around this area. We believe this is a critical topic and a great opportunity for all of us in the community to talk about the ways in which we can add significant value, and specifically business value, to our own organizations. You may also be wondering, well, who is Wilson Learning? Neha gave us a brief introduction about Wilson Learning. I thought it would be appropriate to give you a little bit more of an overview, and we will be talking more about Wilson Learning, who we are, and what we do towards the end of the presentation as well. At a very high level, we are a global learning services organization. We've been in business for over 50 years. And very simply put, we didn't get to being 50 years old by simply providing training. We did this primarily by constantly adapting to the needs of the ever-evolving learner, and at the same time staying true to our philosophy, which is to help organizations achieve performance with fulfillment. We continue to help organizations in three areas: sales effectiveness, leadership effectiveness, and individual effectiveness. And finally, we thought you may want to know more about what we are going to be doing in this webinar. Well, we'll be building a case for the opportunity for HR and L&D and present three simple strategies to help you with your internal clients and your organization. At the end of this presentation, we believe you will have a clear idea and a plan to have more productive internal client relationships and add more value to your business. I'd like to now introduce the main speaker for tonight, Mr. David Yesford. In addition to what Neha said earlier about David, here's a little bit more information. David has been working across the world with Wilson Learning for many years now, and he has been coming to India for over the last 8 years and continues to work extensively in China, Japan, and other countries across APAC and Europe. So getting into our topic today, the purpose of today's conversation really is around to help you challenge you to really rethink your role in L&D and HR. And the way we thought we were going to do this was to first build the case and the opportunity for learning and HR. And we also want to present three simple strategies to help your internal client and your organization. We will also spend some time talking about the execution of it and the discipline needed to work around to do this more successfully. And ultimately, at the end of this discussion, as I mentioned earlier, the goal is to help each of you have more productive internal client relationships in your own organizations.
Thanks, Viv, for the setup. I appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time today to deal with this particular topic. And to further expand on what it is that Vivek talked about and Neha also introduced, right now what we're finding is that leadership and engagement, as I go around the world, is one of the most critical things that people are talking about. It's on everybody's mind, and it has been a hot topic for a while. And the question I would ask you is, are you searching for an answer in terms of how to develop your leaders? My assumption is that's part of the reason why you're here. My guess is that you're also probably struggling with budgets. You have the challenge in terms of how do I make sure what it is that we're trying to do in HR and L&D, how do we get that funded? How do we get that funded each year? And my guess is you also might be struggling to be heard inside your organization, to hear the ideas, to hear the different approaches, to hear different solutions that you can talk about. Today is not about earning the right to sit at the table. However, it is about earning the right to have that strategic dialogue, and that's really what it is that we want to pay attention to. So just as a context, I'm probably going to say things that you've heard before. I'm probably going to say things that you look and say, boy, I didn't need to spend my time listening to that. And what I would do is challenge you to think around what it is that we do. Again, rethink your role in the context of what it is that I'm saying. And what I might say, as Vivek talked about, is really simple. We're talking about simple strategies. Please don't see these as simplistic. They're simple, yet but not simplistic. Let's go ahead and get started with what our conversation right now. And the main question I would ask you is, when you look at what you do, what business are you in? Now, some of you might say we're in HRD. Some of you might say we're in L&D. Some might say human performance improvement, which is a fancy word that people are using right now, organizational development, and maybe even training. The reality is when we think about it, we think about ultimately what business we're in, and all those things that I just talked about. It's really about the problem-solving business. And again, that's a simple way to look at what it is that we're trying to do in HR and L&D, but it's hard to do. And when I talk about the problem-solving business, what we're talking about is the difference between what I have or what the organization has and what the organization wants, and more importantly, what the organization needs. That's really, if you look at the simple way of what we're trying to say, is how do you connect to value, and it's really about making sure you solve the right problem.
Earlier, we talked a little bit about why this topic, and here's some more specific reason and research behind this choice. According to the study conducted by Deloitte University Press, in 2015, 79% of Indian executives rated L&D as important or very important for the success of their business. And 46% of the same executives rate that their L&D teams are ready to offer and add that value. Now, let's think about that for a moment here. Only 46% of the executives say that their teams are ready. The interesting thing about this is also that this 46% includes people who have said mostly ready, somewhat ready, a little bit ready, and all of that included. Now, if we really look at the percentage of executives that rate their L&D teams as fully ready, that number is really a very low 5%. Now, we're not sharing the statistic to alarm everybody, but what we're really saying is that this presents a significant opportunity for all of us in both HR and learning to be able to seize this opportunity and add value to our businesses. Given these statistics, we'd like all of you to participate in a poll before we continue with the rest of our presentation. And the question that we have for you is, how well is L&D positioned to understand business requirements of your organization? And this is a 5-point scale, but we've anchored only 3 of them. Let me just go over them one by one. One being not at all, just order takers. We get the requirements and we move forward and present the solutions. The middle scale is more moderately positioned. We're looking more at a competency-based level. And at the third is true partners with the business. So what we'd like to do is to have you rate this on this scale for the poll right now.
The awkwardness of this, I'm not used to this particular system, but what we see is that there is a good group that sits right in the middle, the competency level, and that's something that organizations do spend a lot of time in identifying competencies. There's still a group, I think there was 10, that are in the order takers, and the good news about that is that's obviously a place to be, and you can improve upon that. And ultimately, what we're trying to get to is where 6 of the people have identified that they are true partners within the business. And as I said before, that's really about a combination of your capability, and I didn't say this earlier, but more your skill set. But it also is, very importantly, about your mindset. So let's talk about how organizations often and how HR, L&D organizations often influence inside organizations. A lot of them do order taking, and that's a pretty common place for organizations. And there's nothing wrong with that. You need to be able to take the orders. You need to be able to listen when the request comes in and respond to that. That's necessary but not enough. You need to do a little bit more. So a lot of organizations then go to more of an HR generalist role. Typically, HR generalists are out there looking for needs analysis. They've got competency models, and they clearly understand behaviorally what's required to build somebody's skills. Where we're trying to go, and really the significant place that you can influence, is really as a true business partner, and as I said before, that problem solver. Well, what does that mean when we talk about problem solver? What that means is that you as a HR business partner understand and respond to your internal clients' needs, priorities, and interests in a way that solves that specific problem, in a way that helps the organization advance. And I want to be really clear about this, that I'm talking about the problem at the organizational level, because that ultimately is when you talk about leadership, which is the topic of how we're building leaders, that really has a sort of an organizational impact. So let's talk about two attitudes. And there's two attitudes that we have in this particular, as we're looking back at the as being a business partner. The first attitude is one that's more client-focused, and that's good. We need to have a client-focused attitude. When we look at the client-focused attitude, you're coming to it with, what can I do to understand them? I'm here to be a problem solver. I'm here to find solutions. That's all well and good, and you need to have that. But if you're only that, a lot of times the client, your internal client, for all intents and purposes, just tells you what they need without the context and asks you to go find something. So in many cases, again, if you only take a client-focused attitude, you're more of the order taker. If you look at, and now continue to look at the alternative role, is more the consultant-focused. You have HR systems in place. That's that HR generalist, as I said before, that has the competency models and the policies and the procedures and all those kinds of things that are in place. And part of the thing that's going through your head when you're doing that is, as I talk to my internal constituents, as I talk to my internal client, why don't they understand me? Why won't they cooperate? Don't they know that I've got competency models and all that kind of stuff in place, and I'm here to do a project? So it's very self-centered in that particular case. In neither case, you're coming together. In neither case, you're able to fully do what you need to do to be a partner. In fact, what we're saying is that it's a combination of both client-focused and consultant-focused in the way that you look at your particular role. And you're striving to understand and respond to those client concerns by demonstrating empathy and integrity and honesty in terms of why you're there, what you're there for. Making sure that you ask the client relevant questions to discover needs. Please understand that people perceive how smart you are based on the questions you ask, and understand that that's really important in terms of the questions you ask. Once you discover and understand the specific needs, you want to provide clear, value-based information about the solution and then follow up consistently. So that's part of as we think about the mindset, what is it that we're trying to do? I like to ask the question when I'm live in front of HR folks and L&D folks, how many of you think you're in sales? And many times only half of the people raise their hand. The reality is that if you look at sales being solving a customer's problem, that's exactly the context that I just set up a few slides ago. And so if you don't mind, what I'm going to do is use some sales language. I don't mean to offend anybody because I think sales is an honorable role. But I want, again, in the context of the mindset, I want you to understand that customers love to buy, but they hate being sold to. And that's really, again, about a mindset and a way that you approach the overall problem. Let's take a look now at the three strategies that Vivek identified before. Again, they're simple strategies. And one of the things that you want to be and often strive to be inside an organization is a trusted advisor. So the first one is, how do you create that trust? What do you got to do? What is important for you in that context of establishing trust all the way with every interaction that you do? Again, in the context of sort of using selling words, I'm going to say you got to have buying motives. The person that you're consulting with needs to buy what it is that you're talking about, needs to buy and understand the solution, and you need to then understand the goals of your client. And you know, probably as much as everybody else in HR, there's so many things going on, so many opportunities. If you're dealing with vendors from the outside or internal capabilities that you have, there's a lot of things that you have available to you. And the critical thing that you need to do is make sense of that complexity to connect directly to value. So let's talk about the first one here in terms of the trust aspect. There's a simple formula that I'll tell you in just a second, but successful HR consultants position themselves and their capabilities as trusted advisors long before the organization is ready to use what it is that you might offer. This is about networking and building relationships and ensuring that with every interaction you have with your potential constituents, with your potential internal clients, that you're making sure you do things that establish trust, because you can't just use it as a technique. It's an overall capability and an approach that you take. Okay? So ultimately what you're trying to do in becoming a trusted advisor is that you begin to move yourself to working on the same side of the table, where you bring your expertise, they bring their expertise. You bring your experience, they bring theirs, And what you're really trying to do is together have the knowledge to solve the problem. That's really where you're trying to go. And that's a combination of credibility plus empathy is going to make you a trusted advisor or help you move in that direction. So when we talk about the first aspect of it, which is around the whole idea of empathy, what you need to do is think about any meeting. You need to go into that meeting with an anticipation of the questions the customer might have, the concerns the customer might have, not your questions. What you're going to do then is, as you look at that, first, you're going to identify those concerns that they might have. If I were my internal constituent, my internal customer, what concerns or questions would I have about the upcoming meeting? This is about putting yourself in their shoes. Then what you do is sort through those most important concerns and convert those concerns to questions. And then finally answer those questions. That's your preparation. So when you go in, what you essentially do is you say, I thought you might have some concerns, and here's the answers. Do you have these same concerns? Here's some answers. You notice Vivek did that at the very beginning. We thought you might have some questions. That's a tremendously valuable, subtle, and valuable tool to use to ensure that people see that you have their best interest in mind. The second piece of that formula, where we said was empathy, is credibility. And there's 4 components to credibility. They're simple kinds of things. Propriety. Make sure that your dressing, your speech, your protocol, your etiquette, pay attention to that. It's really critical. If you're significantly different and violating some issues there, you're going to cause a problem if you come walking into a meeting, for example, in shorts. That's not a good thing. Competence. This is what a lot of people believe is what leads to their credibility, and it's very important to have competence. You need to know the things that are going on in your industry from your capability. You need to know that. You need to bring that to the conversation, and you need more. There's another thing called commonality. It refers to the perception that you hold things in common, your interests, your beliefs, and values. This is not fake. This is true kinds of things that are similar, and you can always find commonality that helps you move into sort of a trust position. And one of the most important things is to clearly and openly state your intent. The way you do that, again, as we did earlier in the conversation, we said, here's the purpose of why we're here, here's the process we're going to go through, and here's the payoff for you to spend the time. Is that okay? And if you that's something you can walk out of here today, out of this meeting, and every meeting that you do, if you just think about that particular statement and openly declare why you're there, it really does enable people to come in closer and listen to what it is you're trying to do. So that's the first part of it. That's really about the whole context of creating the trust and trusted advisor. Second piece of that is, again, buying motives. And please excuse, again, the sales reference. I just think it's important here. And it's about understanding the goals of the client. And when you think about this, successful HR consultants know how to use their expertise, what it is that they know, to tie the defined needs of the organization to the strategy and critical success factors. It's just critical that you can make that business connection. And it's really important, again, in that particular context, that you understand not only what it is that you can offer, but what it is that the organization is looking to do. That's what we mean by critical success factors. And let me give you a simple formula for how to deal with that. But the first thing, again, from a mindset standpoint is, let's think about this. When we talked earlier, we were talking about a consultant mindset versus a internal customer mindset, or internal customer-focused mindset. And you probably feel this in your particular role. With the question when you go into the meeting, who's in control of what happens? You know, the question becomes, is it you as the consultant? Are you in control of what happens, how you go about identifying what the solution is? Is it your internal buyer that's in control? And sometimes you feel like you're in a tug of war. That same dilemma that I positioned earlier in the conversation is who's important. And again, from a mindset standpoint, what I'm suggesting you do is to make sure that with everything, it's not about who has more power in the conversation. In fact, it's how do you continue to direct the issue, the conversation, back to the problem and the specific need, because that, again, is where you're going to add value, where you're going to make a difference. We talk about a bicycle. And when you think about a bicycle, the back wheel is really what gives you drive. What gives you the power to move forward. We reference this as more task motives. They're the standard business issues or the business things that need to be solved. And while there's a lot of different ways to explain it, it can be boiled down, quite frankly, into 4 things. Every business issue that you're going to deal with in HR and L&D is either going to be around how does the organization build people in a way that helps increase revenue of the organization, in a way that decreases cost, in a way that increases quality or engagement or, in fact, maybe even output, and in a way that decreases effort. Everything, when you look at the problems that you're trying to deal with right now and really try and understand and get back behind the why are we developing these people, at the end of the day, it's going to go to one of these 4 things. And that's really important to understand that, because one of the most difficult things that we have in HR and L&D is to kind of cut through all of the stuff that's going on in the noise. And the reality is that when we talk about the systems that we put in place, and let's even say the training that we might put in place, the reality is no one needs training. They need the outcomes of training. And so when you're trying to find out, when you're trying to connect and understand what they're trying to do, your internal constituents, it's understanding which of these 4 task motives are most critical. Now, there could be combinations, but there's usually one that's driving it. If we're talking about leadership, which is what we're talking about here, is how does HR help develop leadership, oftentimes it's tied to increasing quality or, as I said before, increasing engagement. Those are the critical ones. But don't get caught up in that's the only one. And when you think about this, make sure that you quantify. So increased quality is interesting, but to what degree? What specifically are you quality are you trying to do? What's happening in the organization that's a problem? Now, on the front wheel of a bicycle, that's what gives you drive and direction. That's much more about people. And recognize that your internal constituents, every single one of them that you're talking to, has personal motives as well. Why? Why are they doing what it is that they're asking you to do? What do they hope to get out of it? And you can ignore that if you want. However, by truly understanding that, you have a much better opportunity to connect the value in a way, as I said before, that helps the customer or your internal client buy what it is that you're offering. The 4 are very specifically around power. And let me explain these a little bit more because the other ones were a little bit easier. This is really about an expressed need to gain or maintain control over some aspect of the solution. The second one is about approval. This is really about a desire to ensure that others that are affected by whatever decisions you do, whatever decisions they do, will be pleased. The third one is called recognition, and it's a desire to lead and to be recognized in a more visible or innovative way. And then finally, respect. This is a desire to be acknowledged for some kind of expertise that the internal constituent brings to the conversation, to the solution discussion. By understanding those buying motives, you now have the information to move forward in terms of connecting your solution with how it's going to solve the specific task motive in a way that affects personal motives. We call that making sense of complexity and specifically connecting to value. Successful consultants know that value is in the eye of the customer. There's too many times, I see internal HR consultants that have new systems in place and are driven by those new systems. And in trying to sort of meet and address those issues of their internal systems, they completely miss the value conversation with the internal client. So, what do you need to do? Again, this is a simple approach. It's hard to do, but it's a simple approach. What you're going to do first is a solution summary. The solution summary is to describe what it is and how it works. So it could be a needs analysis. It could be a competency tracking. What it is and exactly how it works. I got to tell you, talking about a facilitator, talking about the modules is too much information for the internal constituent. It doesn't matter to me because, again, What I'm going to care about in my solution summary is how is that helping me? How is that? I'm focusing from my perspective. I want to understand value from what I've told you is critical to me. And the way that you advance on that then is the advantage statement. This is a direct appeal to those task motives. If this is about increasing leadership capability, whether that's making sure you have a stronger bench, for example, for succession planning, whether that's you have people that are unengaged and you need to make sure that the energy now is focused into the organization. What you want to make sure is that when you talk about the solution, you say, here's exactly how that's going to help advance the organization's ability to address this particular task motive. Please understand you're going to use the internal client's words, your company words, not those ones that I sort of summarized with. It's much more about that's sort of a organizing category, not necessarily what you're going to say to the individual. And again, as I said before, it's about increasing revenue, decreasing costs, increasing quality, or decreasing effort. The other one that you need to make sure you do, that while task motives and what you could then connect to with advantage statements are often clearly stated things, oftentimes you have to probe a little bit more for those personal motives. You have to listen a little bit differently. But a benefit statement is a direct appeal to the personal motives. Remember, again, what I said before is that the personal motives are power, approval, recognition, and respect. What you want to say is that here's the solution, here's how it's going to meet those specific needs, and here's how it's going to help you maintain control over a specific aspect of what it is you're trying to do. Or again, here's how it's going to people around the organization are going to feel like they're heard around the solution. So you want to be sure that you're very specific about that. Most times, people completely miss this. And by having the context of this personal motive, it really does help you connect. Remember, if you go all the way back to what I was saying around the 3 steps and even the first one being around creating trust, you can see that they all go together. You establish the trust, you then talk about the specific goals of the client, and then you help them see how the solution that you've now brought to bear can solve that problem in a way that's going to work for them and work for the organization. Now, a lot of times, again, and you're an order taker or you're driven by competencies, what you're going to find is that it's easy to slip into a pretty standard rote approach where you're just kind of going through the motions, and because that's all dictated. And you forget to do things around building trust. You forget to make sure that everything you do is about ensuring that you're going to meet those organizational goals and the goals of the client. And you forget that not everybody cares about the wonderful new HR system that you just got and you spent a lot of money on. That really, the purpose of all that is to advance the organization, advance the purpose of the organization in a way that helps the organization be successful. So there's a discipline that's required in this. There's a way that you need to think about, again, continuing these 3 simple things in every single thing that you do. So what do we need to do? First, as I said before, this is about a mindset. Understand and actually believe that you're truly there to provide the right solution to solve the your internal client's problem. That's a mindset issue, again, what it is that you're trying to do. You're not trying to advance any HR system, and you really want to make sure that if you take this mindset, that there's certain things that you can do to not put yourself in a position of an order taker. For example, if you are in an order taker mode, you're here because leadership, we're talking about HR's role in leadership. Well, it would seem to me that there's probably lots of opportunity for you to look around your organization and see not only what are the L&D requirements, for example, to develop leaders, but why? What are you hoping to do? What's the strategy? My assumption is that HR is always connected to that, and everything you do then, again, in terms of definition of right solution, is about helping that organization meet those strategic objectives. 3 things you need to do. Create the trust and trusted advisor. That's that formula that's empathy and credibility. Support the buying process because, remember, people want to buy. They don't want to be sold to. They don't want to have things pushed to them. But it's really about what are the goals of the client, both at a business level and a personal level. And then in knowing that, how do you link to true value from the client perspective that helps advance them and the organization? And make sure you have the discipline to always follow the process. It does get results. Again, it seems simple, and I've given you a couple things that you can walk out of here and do right away. But it's very critical that you continue to follow these all the time. Before I go off into questions, what I want to do is just give you a little bit of background about Wilson Learning. Vivek and Neha at the very beginning gave you some of the high-level overview of who Wilson Learning is. At the very center of what it is that we do, Wilson Learning, is we help people, obviously human, with performance improvement. We do that. Human performance improvement is not any magic. It's basic human resource development. But there's a discipline around everything that's required around that basic human development that includes knowledge, skills, and abilities. It talks about the environment. It talks about making sure there's measurement and management components in there. That's what human performance improvement is about. And what makes Wilson Learning different is the way that we execute on what I just said. First, we do that with learning that inspires. The learning that we have over the 50 years that we've been in business, we've researched and thoroughly researched the topics and the areas that we talk about. We make sure that everything that we have in terms of creating that learning experience is inspiring. Larry Wilson, our founder, said, we learn through experience, but we're not very good at it. And one of the things that we do in our learning environment that we create, the learning systems that we create, is that we make sure that we help people tap into their own experience and then make sense of that through a model. Rather than giving people techniques, we want to build an inside-out commitment for people to see how they might be able to look at a situation differently. We also then have services and systems that both extend and enable the learning. One thing is true, that learning doesn't, or performance change does not happen in a 2-day event. It just simply does not. And you need to have services that ultimately ensure that the learner, first of all, understands why they're there, understands the expectations, understands what's expected of them. Also that the learner, when they go through the learning, that they come out of it going into a supportive environment that allows them to perform, because it's not about what you learn, it's about what you use, and that's really what it is that we focus on. Now, we do this in sales, leadership, and individual effectiveness. Wilson Learning started 50 years ago in sales. We expanded in the early 70s into leadership and individual effectiveness, and have been at it for a very long time. These are the key areas that we focus on, that we make sure we're disciplined in terms of the solutions that we can offer. And for those of you that, again, look at competencies, everything that we have is based on successful competency models around what it takes to be a success in sales, a success as a leader, and in building foundational capabilities and skills. We do this in a value-based way. We believe, as Vivek talked about in the beginning, about performance with fulfillment. Fulfillment for us is not about being happy and being satisfied. Fulfillment is really about that you see your personal vision. You see what it is that you believe in the work you do. And by making sure that everything that we do helps support that people to see that connection, we have found that people perform better and longer over time. And research indicates that that's very clearly. That's one value that we have. The second value we have is what everybody calls win-win, but it's much more about a responsibility. Win-win in many cases means you win, I win. It's a simultaneous kind of a thing. For Wilson Learning, what we believe is we only win when you as an organization achieve your purpose. That's the only way we win. Even if you buy from us, if you don't advance your purpose, we didn't win. And that's, again, that's built into everything we do. Last thing I'll say about Wilson Learning, and then I'll take some questions, is global. We're around the world. Global is not only where we are, and as Vivek identified, we're in 58 different countries, 35 different languages. Last month on our global website, 150 countries visited our website because we implement in a lot of other countries besides the one we're resident in. But global is not only where we are, it's who we are. And as we go around the world and we try to expand our footprint and capability, It's not about flying somebody in from America or from Europe or somewhere else. It's really about ensuring that we have somebody local that understands in India, for example, what it takes to negotiate. I've been coming to India for 8 years. I know how to negotiate. I know all the technical things. I know all the tricks. I know all the way to deal with it. And I know how we, Wilson Learning, talk about that. But even if I said exactly the same thing as someone that's local, I have less credibility. And we believe that because of the cultural empathy that's there, that actually adds to the value of who we are as Wilson Learning. So let me get back to then the topic that we had at hand, which is questions that you might have around the issue of the evolution or the role of HR and L&D in advancing leaders. What questions do we have?
Yeah, David, we have a few questions. Thanks for that. And I'm not going to read out who asked the question, just the questions themselves, and we have quite a few actually. So the first question that I have is, how can the link between L&D and increase in revenues be established, and can you cite any case studies where this has been done effectively?
The link between L&D and increasing revenues. Well,
Right.
I got again. This is not. Let me not talk about it only in the aspect of leadership, so I can open it up a little bit more. But ultimately, you're developing. They come to you because they want to develop people, right? And so let's say it's in the sales area, because you're talking about revenue in this particular case. Let's say it's in the sales area. What you're finding is that people don't have the skills. And the assumption is by the sales manager or the sales leader, they don't have the skills. They're not closing enough business. They're not customer focused, whatever that might be. Now that's a simple one that you have a little clue in the back of your head that says, wait a minute, this is about increased revenue, increased profits. What you want to do in terms of establishing that link is to say, okay, so if people ask questions better, what does that get you? What's not happening now that needs to happen? And it might be, part of the question could be, or part of the answer could be, well, they're not connecting with the customer. They're not getting good data. Therefore, we don't have anything to offer to them because we're just kind of shooting in the dark because we don't have the good information. All right. So then you begin to ask, quantify that for me. What does that mean for you? If you're able to question better, if you're able to differentiate better, is there a target that you're trying to go to? Is there a reason that that's there? And the answer could come back and say, yeah, we have a goal. One of our critical success factors is increase revenue by 10%. Okay. So what you now then have is a link between some of the issues that they're talking about, but developing salespeople and creating differentiation, creating salespeople so that they can differentiate in a way that enables the organization to increase by 10% revenue. Right? Now I can quantify that number. Now I know what that is. As an HR and L&D person, you could have gotten caught up in the questioning, the lack of data. But now you have a bigger level conversation that you can have that still might lead to part of what we need to offer is better questioning capabilities. But you're doing it not in the context of the tactical asking questions. You're doing it in the context of enabling the sales force, the salesperson, to help increase organizational revenues by 10%. And by the way, success stories, we have I didn't answer the success stories. We have several different organizations that in terms of increasing revenue where they essentially, by focusing on that bigger issue and making sure that they, in one case, they're trying to create good foundational skills with consistent language across the organization, sales and marketing. And for a global pharmaceutical company, actually has increased their revenue by 52% over a 3-year period. Please understand, by the way, this doesn't mean that it's just training that did it. You and I both know that it's not just training. It's a lot of other system things that are in place. But developing a people is clearly part of what it is that you need to do.
All right. Thanks, David. The next question that we have is, what happens when personal motives take over organizational motives and drivers, leading to conflicting situation? And typically the question comes from people seem to be working on priorities which are their own.
Well, partly what it is, again, I think is you're always going to do that. You're always going to get caught up in sort of the personal motives. especially if those personal motives are conflicting. So there's multiple personal motives, especially if those personal motives aren't in the context of, doing their role to help the business, but their personal motives are in doing the role to advance themselves in the organization or to advance their ideas. Ultimately, what you need to do is listen and identify which of those personal motives is most critical. And my guess is, in this case, the example would be recognition. It might be one of the, I'm trying to get recognized for what it is that I'm trying to do. You can easily, and I say this word in quotes, you can easily move the conversation back to those task motives with a clear context to say, if we understand what the business is trying to do and the solution I can go find, whether it's internal or you come to people like Wilson Learning, you go external, the solution I can find is going to help advance this objective. And unfortunately, a lot of these conversations that you're having begin to get sort of bogged down in training and how visible the training is. And as I said before, no one needs that training. They need the outcomes of training. And so what ultimately you need to do is continue to bring it back to the task motive and share why that's going to help them gain greater recognition, right? We said recognition is the desire to be unique and be more visible or more innovative. And if you focus it on the business, that's going to help you have a much greater conversation. And let's also be really clear. Sometimes that's not going to work because you're not going to convince them. Sometimes logic is not necessarily the main driver in people's conversation with you. But again, you got to know that, and you're not going to win them all.
All right, thanks, David. Next question is more about the study, and it says, if only 5% of executives claim organizations are fully ready, what actually defines fully ready?
When they look at, and this is not our study, this is a Deloitte study that you can look up, Human Capital. It's Human Capital Trends. If you go Deloitte Human Capital Trends 2015, and ultimately what they're saying is that L&D typically are just taking orders. They're staying true to their processes around rigid HR systems that we have in place and so on, and they're not able to have that strategic conversation. That's what fully ready, in the way that I've interpreted the data, is about ready to have those strategic conversations. And what we're talking to you today here is about, again, that capability to have the strategic conversations. And a lot of the conversation about HR is about how do they get a seat at the executive table. You're never going to get a seat at the executive table because of status or position. You're going to get a seat at the executive table where you can actually contribute because you understand how to have that strategic dialogue, that strategic conversation. And it's interesting, the last couple of questions have really been about having that strategic conversation, and that is exactly what it is that the CEOs are saying is that that the L&D and HR organizations just aren't prepared to have that conversation because they're more focused on the different systems that they have, HR systems, training systems.
Thanks, David. The next question that we have, I think we probably have time for 2 or 3 more, was what should be the time gap to revisit organizational competencies and strategies? Time frame between.
Well, I would always say when you look at that, it's probably on a yearly by yearly basis. Unless you've changed strategy significantly where you might do that more quickly, you want to make sure that, when you look at competencies, the reality of what's going to happen with competencies is the examples of how you demonstrate those inside your organization are going to change. Behaviors don't change in competencies. They just don't. Behaviors are behaviors, and that's the way it is. The examples of how you apply that or the priorities by which those are important are really dictated as you move through the year, as you move through the couple of years with the overall strategy. So you can spend your time on those kinds of things. But quite frankly, that's much more about embedding your systems in place. Let me be really clear. You need to have the competencies. I love competencies. I think they're really critical. But if there's an overemphasis on the competencies, unless your role in the organization is to develop foundational skills, foundational capabilities, they should only be sort of guiding posts for you. And I wouldn't necessarily sort of run out to change the competencies, every year. I'd do it maybe every couple of years, I guess.
All right. Next question, David, is it is difficult to have people at ground level accepting a solution, and they often seek escapism in terms of how they can work around the system or solution. How can one make sure that everyone in the organization is motivated to take up or believe the solution?
Well, there's a couple things about that, and again, the topic of this is reinventing HR to develop leaders, and when you look at that, you got to start with the leaders in terms of making sure that the leaders are clear about what outcomes and what the strategy is for the organization and reinforcing that throughout. What you need to do then, what I'm hearing in the question is, we have HR systems that are in place for specific reasons, whether those are legal reasons, whether those are consistency reasons, whether those are money-related issues, those compensation issues. And so you need to make sure that when you're looking at the systems that you're talking about that people are going around, they're going around for a reason. They don't see the value in it. And so you need to, again, step out, as I said before, in helping people buy. You need to step out of your shoes into their shoes and say, why is this difficult? Why are they going around that? And in the context of your organization, what it is that you can offer, you can explain why those are important, or you might realize that you don't necessarily need to have some of those systems. My guess is most of them are in place for a reason, though. So Vivek, this is really about more connecting with why those are in place. And if they're just in place because they've always been in place, you're in trouble with people following them.
Okay, yeah, thanks, David. We have, a few more questions are coming in now. The one person says the knowledge and framework shared today are all relevant. However, they're more interested in some implementation of these concepts through case studies. I think, let me answer that one. You might be able to find a lot of case studies, and David referred to them earlier on our website as well. Some of the case studies that we have, in fact, all of them are specifically about how we've made a difference to organizational bottom lines and actual business results. So, and we use the same process when we're working with the client. So some of those case studies and success stories might give you an idea. The next question we have, David, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, let me add just a couple things about that. There's a large high-tech organization. It's global. And in fact, one of the things that we do with all of their internal, it's not HR in this particular case, it's actually more of their internal consultants. So similar things are in trying to solve specific issues. And as a result of working with them over the last, we deliver virtual content to them, but also then face-to-face classroom. They've been able to increase revenue pretty significantly, I believe, in the realm of about 8 to 9%. Now, again, we're looking at a huge organization globally because those internal constituents are really connecting with a way by which to increase efficiency inside the organization. So it's a global high-tech organization that, if I mention the name, you guys would all know who it is. And we have that across. We do a lot of work in the high-tech area. We also do a lot of work in the pharmaceutical area as well from an HR organization.
Thanks, David. David, there's another question here which says, no matter how much is said and done about the importance of L&D, still there is difficulty in getting the business operations buy-in. How can we get them involved and understand their pain area? Only then can we provide a learning solution. Basically, how do we showcase value to business heads?
Yeah, and here's the first thing I'll say is it's a marathon, not a sprint. There's not a technique to do it. And quite frankly, if the organization and the HR and L&D organization have been order takers, it's really hard to go in and say, okay, I want to have a strategic conversation. You can't do that. But what I would suggest you do is go look at your annual report. Go identify, listen around the hallway what problems people are having. And while you still might go in and do order taking, here's an interesting thing that takes some people off guard, is when they say, we need to develop our leaders and we need to have this skill and that skill and this skill and that skill. If you then do what I said earlier, try and quantify it, ask the why question. Why does this connect? Unfortunately, sometimes people won't know. The people giving you the orders sometimes don't know. But if you can say, I know that our strategy is to increase revenue by increasing customer or employee engagement over the next 3 years, is this initiative tied to that? By offering some of that information, by doing your homework in terms of what's going on from a strategy standpoint, you can be in a much better place. Please understand that the people you're often talking to may not have your answers that you're looking for. You need to do the due diligence to go find out what the potential task motive is, to find out what it is that the organization ultimately is trying to do. And if you can sit there as you're sitting in the meeting and people are telling you what it is that they want and begin to make some of the strategic conversations, the first time, the second time, the third time, they may not say anything, but they will become dependent on your ability to connect to some of those things and ask the questions. And quite frankly, they'll prepare better to make those connections for you. So it's a show a little bit of what it is you're trying to do here. Again, always do the trust part of it, why you're there, why you're asking those questions, and then make a connection to what you might understand as strategy. And you can do it in two ways. It looks like this is connected to this strategy that I heard the CEO say, or I'm not sure, but it sounds like, help me with this. Is this what this is about? You can either tell them or engage them, but either way, you're demonstrating in a very subtle way what it is you can do. By knowing that, then you can also ask questions. Remember what I said before is that part of the way that you demonstrate your competence is by the questions you ask, not by the answers that you have, but by the simple, clear, concise questions you have, seeking out an understanding of the personal motive, right? So, technical motive, task motive. Sorry.
Right. Last question. I think we have time for just one more. You may have talked about this earlier too, David, but how do we measure the effectiveness of our training programs and convert them into dollars?
Well, what the first thing you have to do is to understand, again, I keep going back to the task motive. You need to understand what ultimately you're trying to do. If you believe that the effectiveness of your training program is how many people got through and a competency test at the end, then you're stuck because no one cares about that. I mean, they really don't at the business level. There's places that people care about that. But what you want to do is to say, back to my question about you need 10% increase in revenue, you then begin to ask, how does this development need to affect them? How long do you think that that's going to be? And you identify the levers that you're trying to change before, and then you evaluate them on a periodic basis after. We do a process where after the development, we go through a process called extended learning, and so we continue to remind people about some of the components of the learning over the course of the next 3 months, and then we do an impact evaluation study to ask, in the last 3 months, in the sales opportunities that you were in, how many of them the way you approached it were changed? How many of you used the skills? We begin to then focus on the usage of skills and then look at the outcome. We have just one last thing if you want to do case study. We just have, it's not published, it's still in the back in marketing at this particular point, but it's not published, of a global pharmaceutical company. This part of it happened to be focused in Europe. And one of the things that they clearly needed to do was to increase revenue. Their target was, I think it was around 15%, 20% per salesperson. And what they identified was that there was a specific packet, because this is in pharmaceutical, that they understood that if they handed out a packet, were able to hand out a packet, that it generated $50 for them. They did the research and they knew that. And so they identified very clearly before the training current packets, we did an assessment there, and then how many they needed to create. And at the end of the 6-month study, this was a very short 6-month study, in fact, each salesperson was able to increase their revenue by 35%, just based on the packet and then ultimately the market share. So it's really about what's the metric you're trying to change, how do you measure that, how do you see the development connecting to that, and then you got to measure.
All right. Thanks, David. I think that's about the time that we have. Neha, over to you, please.
Thank you, David and Vivek, for such an insightful session. And with this question and answer session, we are going to wrap up today's webinar. Once again, we thank today's webinar partner, Wilson Learning. Finally, our special thanks to David and Vivek, the speaker for this webinar, for their time and invaluable information that they have shared with us today. And I would like to thank everybody in the webinar audience for participating in today's presentation. We will come back to you with many more. That concludes today's webcast. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.